In the soft glow of dawn, a lantern sways gently above the tavern door. The smell of fresh bread drifts through the air, mingling with the earthy scent of wood smoke. Somewhere down the cobblestone street, the steady clip-clop of hooves approaches, a reminder that soon the quiet will give way to voices, laughter, and the clinking of pewter mugs. Today, we step quietly into the world of a colonial tavern keeper, a place where weary travelers find rest and stories flow as freely as the ale. The first light of morning slips through the small paned windows, casting soft gold over the worn oak floors. The tavern, still hushed from the night's rest, holds the faint scent of yesterday's fire, a mingling of ash, pine, and the sweet tang of cider spilled on the counter. Outside, the colonial village is only just waking. A rooster calls from somewhere near the edge of the green, and the air is sharp with the coolness that lingers before the sun fully warms the earth. The tavern keeper, a man in his middle years with calloused hands and a steady gait, stirs from his bed above the tap room. He has lived with this rhythm for decades, the quiet hours before the day's business, when the world seems to breathe slowly. He dresses simply, in a linen shirt and wool waistcoat, his leather apron folded neatly over a chair, waiting for the work ahead. The stairs creak under his weight as he descends into the room that will soon be bustling with life. The hearth is his first concern. Even in the warmer months, it is the heart of the tavern, for boiling water, for warming bread, for the comfort of a glowing flame. He kneels and stirs the embers from last night, coaxing them to life with a twist of straw and a careful breath. The flames catch, licking the blackened logs, and soon the room begins to smell faintly of smoke and warmth. He adds the iron kettle, filled from the well out back, to heat for the morning's tea and coffee. There are pewter mugs to polish, wooden benches to straighten, and the long counter to wipe down. A stray card from last night's game of whist lies abandoned on the floor, a silent reminder of the conversations and laughter that linger here like ghosts. Outside, a cart rumbles past, the driver calling to his horse. Soon, those sounds will be joined by the clamor of guests, traders, farmers, soldiers, and travelers passing along the post road. The tavern keeper moves through the space with quiet efficiency. He knows which bench wobbles if you lean too far, which cupboard door sticks unless you lift it slightly, and how much ale remains in each cask by the weight alone. This is not just a place of business, it is his home, his livelihood, and a hub for the small colonial community. Here, news is shared, deals are struck, and friendships are forged over the clink of tankards. As the kettle begins to steam, he steps to the door, swinging it open to let in the morning light. The signboard above the door, painted with the tavern's emblem, a golden stag, creaks on its iron bracket in the breeze. From here, he can see the dirt road stretching toward the harbour in one direction and toward the inland farms in the other. Today, like every day, promises a steady flow of faces, both familiar and new. The tavern is ready to wake. The soft grey light of dawn spills through the shutters, slipping across the wide planked floorboards like the fingers of a careful hand. Outside, the first chirps of robins greet the day, their notes mingling with the faint, rhythmic thud of a horse's hooves far down the road. The tavern is still, but not for long. Soon, it will hum with life once more. You rise from your small chamber above the main room, the air crisp and tinged with the faint scent of yesterday's wood smoke. The moment your feet touch the cool floor, you know that the day's work is about to begin. Every morning in a colonial tavern starts the same way. Quietly, deliberately, with the understanding that before the guests stir, the keeper's hands have already shaped the day. Downstairs, the hearth holds the ghost of last night's fire, its embers slumbering under a blanket of ash. You kneel, coaxing them awake with a few careful breaths until they glow, then feed them with small sticks of kindling. Soon, the gentle crackle fills the air, and the first ribbons of warmth swirl upward, chasing away the night's chill. In the dim light, you move about with practiced ease, the wooden table wiped, pewter mugs polished, the floor swept clean of any stray crumbs from last night's lively supper. Every detail matters. A tidy room tells the traveler that they are welcome, that this place is tended to with care. From the kitchen comes the low, steady rhythm of the bread oven warming. You measure out the flour, the coarse grains spilling like pale sand into the wooden trough. The yeasty scent of dough from yesterday lingers faintly in the air. With hands dusted white, you begin kneading fresh loaves, pressing and folding the dough as the sun's first golden beams slip through the kitchen window. Outside, the yard begins to stir. The stable boy leads the horses to water, their breath puffing in little clouds against the cool air. Chickens scratch in the dirt, clucking softly, as if discussing the day's events before they happen. From the well, the sound of the rope creaking signals the drawing of the morning's fresh water, a necessity for brewing tea, washing vegetables, and quenching the thirst of guests who have ridden miles. Inside, the scents begin to mingle. The earthy warmth of baking bread, the faint sweetness of apples simmering for pies, the sharp yet comforting aroma of coffee beans roasting in the pan. In a colonial tavern, breakfast is both a comfort and a statement. A hearty spread tells weary travelers they've found refuge. This morning, you prepare thick slices of ham, cornmeal mush drizzled with molasses, and fresh butter churned from the milk brought in just yesterday. The long oak table in the main room begins to take shape, pewter plates set neatly, mugs waiting for steaming tea or cider, the bread knife resting on a cutting board beside a mound of fragrant loaves. The sunlight grows, warmer now, lighting the dust motes that float lazily through the air. It's the kind of morning where time seems to move a little slower, but the work never truly stops. From time to time you pause at the window to glance at the road. Will there be new guests arriving today? A merchant caravan heading to the next town? Or perhaps a courier riding through, eager for a quick meal and fresh horse before continuing his journey? In a world without the instant messages of the future, travelers are bearers of news, their stories and updates as valuable as the goods they carry. As the hour nears, the sound of creaking floorboards overhead signals the waking of your overnight guests. The first door opens, and slow footsteps descend the stairs. You greet them with a quiet smile and a warm good morning, offering them a seat at the table as the tavern's heart begins to beat again. By now, the fire blazes cheerfully in the hearth, the bread rests golden in its basket, and the coffee fills the room with its deep, rich scent. You pour, you serve, you listen. Mornings in the tavern are not just about feeding the body. They're about restoring the spirit, readying travelers for the miles ahead. Here, in the gentle glow of the early day, the work of a tavern keeper is more than just duty. It's hospitality made tangible, warmth you can feel, taste, and remember long after the road carries you away. The tavern door creaks open just as the sun has climbed above the tree line, sending a wash of gold across the wide planked floor. A crisp breeze drifts in, carrying with it the mingled scents of wood smoke from nearby chimneys and the faint tang of horses from the road. The day's first travelers are arriving. You glance up from polishing a pewter tankard to see a man in a long brown coat step inside, brushing road dust from his hat. His boots are thick with mud from miles of unpaved road. Behind him, a younger companion, perhaps his son, hauls in 2 saddlebags and sets them down with a thump. You greet them in your steady, warm voice, offering a seat near the hearth, where a small fire still burns from the night before. The tavern's wooden beams seem to embrace newcomers, their dark grains catching the flicker of light. The guests visibly relax as the chill leaves their fingers. As they settle in, you fetch a fresh jug of cider and pour it into mugs, the frothy surface catching the morning light. They sip slowly, eyes scanning the room, taking in the mounted candle sconces, the sturdy oak tables, and the worn checkerboard in the corner. Before long, the front door opens again. This time, it's a pair of women wrapped in cloaks, travelers from a neighboring town. Judging by the baskets they carry, their cheeks are pink from the morning air. They greet you warmly and exchange a few pleasantries before taking a table near the window, where the pale light falls across their faces. The tavern begins to hum with the low, steady sound of conversation. You move quietly between tables, topping off mugs, delivering plates of warm bread and cheese, and answering questions about the road ahead. The stories begin to flow. Tales of narrow escapes from sudden rainstorms, of wagon wheels breaking miles from the nearest blacksmith, of local fairs with fiddlers who played well into the night. It is here, in this early hour, that the tavern feels most like the heart of the community. Travelers, though strangers to one another, begin to share the same table. A man just arrived from Boston describes the latest news from the city, his voice low and serious, while another recounts a fox sighting on the road, earning a round of laughter. In the corner, a young boy, likely the son of one of the guests, traces the grain of the wooden tabletop with his finger, eyes darting curiously from one guest to another. You bring him a small honey cake from the kitchen without a word, setting it before him with a smile. His eyes widen in quiet delight. The scent of baking pies from the back room drifts forward, mingling with the tang of cider and the earthy aroma of the morning's fire. Outside, the sound of horses snorting and shifting in the stable adds a steady rhythm to the morning, a reminder that while conversations flow easily here, the road will soon call again. For now, however, the guests are content to rest in the tavern's shelter, sharing warmth, food, and a few moments of peace before continuing their journeys. And you, as the keeper of this space, take quiet satisfaction in knowing you've created a refuge where strangers can feel, if only for a little while, at home. By midday, the tavern was in full swing, alive with the hum of voices and the clatter of activity. The warm aroma of roasted meat mingled with the tang of ale, drifting out through the open windows and drawing in weary travelers from the road. Outside, the dusty main street of the small colonial town bustled with carts, horses, and locals tending to errands. Inside, however, the tavern felt like a world unto itself, a place where news, laughter, and the occasional whispered secret flowed as freely as the drinks. Behind the bar, the tavern keeper's hands moved with well-practiced ease, filling mugs, slicing cheese, and exchanging quick words with regular patrons. The midday meal was one of the busiest times, a period when farmers and merchants alike sought a warm seat, a hearty plate, and perhaps a bit of conversation. The tables were crowded, each one holding its own small circle of stories. A group of soldiers swapping tales from distant garrisons, a merchant boasting about a shipment of fine fabrics from England, a young couple quietly discussing their future. In the far corner, an old sailor leaned back in his chair, the brim of his hat casting a shadow over his weathered face as he recounted a storm at sea to a small audience. His voice rose and fell like the waves he described, his words carrying both danger and wonder. Laughter erupted at another table as a tradesman spun a tale about a runaway pig disrupting the morning market. The tavern keeper, moving between tables, caught snippets of each story, nodding politely here, offering a knowing smile there. Not all conversations were for public ears, however. Near the back, two men sat with their heads close together, their voices low. On the surface, they might have been discussing the price of grain, but their guarded glances and quick silences suggested something else. Perhaps business of a more private or political nature. In these colonial times, taverns were more than just places to eat and drink. They were the heartbeat of the community, where news traveled quickly and sometimes discreetly. As plates were cleared and mugs refilled, the air grew thicker with the mingled scents of food, pipe smoke, and the faint perfume of the potted herbs near the hearth. Outside, the sun climbed higher, but inside, the dim light and low ceiling created a cocoon of warmth and familiarity. The tavern keeper, though busy, took quiet pride in this, in knowing his establishment was more than a business. It was a gathering place, a shelter, a backdrop to the shared stories of a growing town. By the time the church bell struck 1, the energy began to shift. Some patrons drained the last of their ale and rose to return to work, while others lingered, reluctant to step back into the bright afternoon. For the tavern keeper, the midday rush had been both exhausting and deeply satisfying. The chairs were still warm from their occupants, the tables scattered with crumbs and rings from sweating mugs, evidence of a bustling midday that had brought the tavern to life. The afternoon sun hung low in the sky, casting a warm amber glow across the packed earth road that wound through the village. Inside the tavern, the air hummed with quiet anticipation. The clatter of tankards, the low murmur of conversation, and the occasional creak of wooden chairs filled the room. But beneath it all was a subtle shift in energy. Everyone knew it was almost time. At this hour, the stagecoach from Boston was due to arrive, a welcome burst of excitement in an otherwise steady day. The coach brought news, letters, travelers, and goods from far-off places, a tangible link to the wider world. For the tavern keeper, it was both a moment of bustle and a chance to showcase hospitality. I stepped to the window, wiping my hands on a linen cloth, and peered down the road. A faint cloud of dust shimmered in the sunlight, and soon the rhythmic clop-clop of hooves reached my ears. The sound grew louder, joined by the jingle of harness buckles and the creak of heavy wheels over ruts. The front door swung open as a few locals moved outside, eager to greet the arrivals. I followed, pulling my apron straighter and brushing the wood shavings from my shirt. Standing at the edge of the porch, I could see the dark silhouette of the coach emerge from the haze, a sturdy, mud-spattered carriage pulled by 4 chestnut horses, their coats glistening with sweat. The driver, a broad-shouldered man in a faded hat, cracked the reins and called out a sharp, "Ha!" The team slowed, hooves thudding against the earth until the coach rolled to a stop in front of the tavern. Immediately, the air filled with movement and chatter. Passengers leaned from the open windows, stretching cramped limbs. The driver clambered down and swung open the door, offering his hand to the first traveler, a woman in a deep blue traveling cloak, her bonnet slightly askew from the long journey. Behind her, a merchant stepped out, dusting his coat. Sleeves. 2 more passengers followed, a young man with a leather satchel slung over his shoulder and an older gentleman whose cane tapped the packed dirt as he disembarked. I offered a warm smile and a simple, "Welcome to the tavern, friends. You'll find the fire warm and the cider fresh." The woman's eyes softened with relief as she stepped up onto the porch, and the others followed in her wake. The driver began unloading their trunks and parcels, setting them down with soft thuds along the porch. I recognized some crates marked with the black stenciled letters of the Boston Post, goods ordered by villagers weeks ago. Inside, the tavern transformed into a small theater of arrivals. Regular patrons watched the new guests with curiosity, while the newcomers took in the room's crackling hearth, the polished bar, and the faint smell of roasting meat. The merchant approached the counter, asking after a room and a warm plate. The older gentleman found a spot near room and a warm plate. The older gentleman found a spot near the fire, his cane propped against the arm of the chair as he sighed contentedly. The young man wandered toward a group of locals, already deep in conversation about road conditions and the weather along the coast. Meanwhile, I moved between the guests, setting out mugs of cider and plates of bread with cheese. The tavern's role was more than just shelter. It was a gathering place where strangers became acquaintances and sometimes friends over a shared meal. From outside came the thud of crates being stacked, followed by the faint rustle of envelopes. The post was here. Villagers stepped forward, eager to collect letters and packages. One young woman clutched a folded sheet to her chest with shining eyes, no doubt a message from a loved one far away. The stagecoach driver, his work done for now, eased into a chair at the far end of the bar. I poured him a mug without asking, the kind of silent understanding that came from years of shared routine. He sipped deeply, then leaned back with a satisfied grunt. As the sun dipped lower, the stagecoach would be turned toward its next stop. But for now, the tavern brimmed with life. The steady rhythm of the day had been punctuated by this moment, a reminder of how the tavern was not just a building, but a hub where lives intersected. And as I stood there, watching travelers and townsfolk mingle, I thought about how, in some small way, every arrival and every departure wove another thread into the fabric of our little corner of the colonies. As twilight draped the colonial town in shades of rose and lavender, the tavern came alive in a way it never did during the daylight hours. The warm amber glow of tallow candles flickered in every corner, casting long shadows across the timbered walls. Outside, the chill of the evening encouraged townsfolk, travelers, and farmers alike to gather inside the comforting embrace of the tavern. The scent of roasting venison, fresh bread, and mulled cider drifted into the street, drawing in those who craved warmth for both body and spirit. The keeper, sleeves rolled to the elbows, moved between the kitchen and the common room with a well-practiced rhythm. His eyes scanned each table, making sure no guest's cup sat empty for long. The bar counter gleamed under the candlelight, polished smooth by years of service and countless elbows leaning in for a chat. By now, the main room was a gentle roar of human voices, a medley of accents and dialects that reflected the diverse life of colonial America. English settlers discussed the news from across the ocean, German farmers swapped tales of harvest yields, and French traders offered stories of faraway towns. In one corner, a group of local men laughed heartily over a card game, their tankards clinking with each toast. At another table, a weary traveller described his week-long journey along rutted roads, the hardships softened in the telling by the generosity of the tavern's cider. Music was not always a given, but on certain evenings a fiddler could be found standing near the hearth, his bow dancing across the strings to fill the air with lively reels. The music had a way of loosening stiff shoulders and coaxing feet into tapping against the worn wooden floor. The tavern's fireplace, crackling with well-seasoned oak, provided not just heat, but a central gathering point. Guests would often lean in, the firelight painting their faces gold as they exchanged news, rumors, and the occasional tall tale. The keeper knew that this part of the evening was more than just business. It was the lifeblood of the community. Here, disputes might be settled over ale, alliances forged with a handshake, and friendships renewed with shared laughter. Travelers especially found the tavern to be a refuge. Many arrived as strangers but left as acquaintances, having spent the night in spirited conversation under the keeper's roof. The evening rush also demanded the keenest attention. Orders came quickly. A tankard of bitter beer here, a plate of salted pork there. The kitchen bustled like a beehive, with the innkeeper's wife directing the serving maids to carry platters to the waiting crowd. The keeper, always listening, could tell when a guest was in the mood for quiet reflection or eager to be drawn into a story. As the night deepened, the conversations grew bolder. Political talk was never far from the lips of the colonists, particularly in these years when the winds of change were stirring. A merchant might mutter about unfair taxes, a farmer might voice concern over the latest royal decrees. The tavern, in its own way, was a quiet stage where the drama of colonial life played out in small but meaningful acts. And yet, there was still plenty of light-hearted talk to be had. A fisherman recounted his most recent catch, which, according to him, had been the size of a small child, to a chorus of chuckles. A young courting couple shared a private table near the wall, speaking in low tones, their hands brushing occasionally over mugs of spiced cider. Even the weary stagecoach driver, who had just completed a punishing day's route, found himself smiling at the warmth of the company. By the time the last orders of the evening were placed, the tavern's air was heavy with the mingled aromas of food, drink, and pipe smoke. The keeper paused for a moment, leaning against the bar to watch his guests. He felt a quiet satisfaction in knowing that for a few hours, this wooden room had been more than a place to eat and drink. It had been a haven where laughter was shared, troubles were halved, and memories quietly tucked away for years to come. The evening in a colonial tavern has its own kind of rhythm, slower than the rush of the midday meals or the lively chatter of the stagecoach's arrival, yet steady and purposeful. The sun, long since slipped beyond the horizon, leaves the streets outside, wrapped in a velvety darkness. Inside, the flicker of tallow candles and the soft crackle of the hearth create a cozy, amber glow, casting long shadows against the panelled walls. The tavern has been alive all day, but now comes the time for careful attention to the tasks that ensure it will be ready to welcome guests again tomorrow. The first duty is always to attend to the remaining patrons. Not everyone departs once supper is finished. A few linger by the fire, tankards in hand, telling slow, meandering stories. Some are travelers reluctant to climb the narrow staircase to their sleeping quarters. Others are locals, savoring the last conversation of the night before braving the chilly walk home. The tavern keeper moves quietly among them, topping off mugs, replacing dying candles, and making certain that each feels unhurried. Hospitality, even late into the night, is part of the tavern's reputation. In the kitchen, the work of the day's cooks continues, though in a quieter way. Pans are scrubbed until they shine, wooden spoons wiped and stored in their places, and leftover bread set aside for tomorrow's breakfast. The scent of the day's stews still lingers, mingling with the sharper aroma of cider and ale. Every now and then, the back door opens to let out a curl of smoke or a servant carrying a bucket of scraps for the animals. Even in darkness, the tavern hums with its own kind of industry. Once the last paying customer leaves, often with a hearty handshake and a promise to return, the tavern keeper begins the final sweep of the common room. Chairs are pushed neatly under tables, crumbs brushed onto a waiting tray, and the wood floor given a quick sweep with a stiff broom. It is not a deep cleaning that will come in the morning, but enough to restore order after the day's bustle. Each table is inspected for spills, the pewter tankards gathered and taken to the scullery for washing. One of the most important nighttime duties is securing the tavern itself. The thick oak front door is bolted from within, and the windows are checked to ensure they are latched. In Colonial America, a tavern was not only a gathering place but also a storehouse of goods, barrels of ale, sacks of flour, jars of molasses. Protecting these from theft was essential, especially in towns where travelers were as likely to be strangers as they were friends. Upstairs, the sleeping rooms are visited one by one. The tavern keeper moves softly, carrying a single candle. In each room, he checks that the guests are settled comfortably. Extra blankets are offered if the night is particularly cold. The hearths in the larger rooms may be fed one last log so that the warmth will last until dawn. Quiet words are exchanged, and then the doors are pulled, gently closed. The final rituals are as much for the tavern keeper's peace of mind as they are for practicality. A ledger is brought out, and the day's earnings carefully recorded by the light of a single candle stub. Coins are counted and placed in a small lockbox, while outstanding debts are noted in neat script. The tavern's accounts tell the story of the day: who drank the most ale, which rooms were filled, and whether a passing peddler spent generously or sparingly. Only when every duty is complete does the tavern keeper allow himself to rest. He might sit for a moment in the now quiet common room, listening to the last embers of the fire sigh and collapse into ash. Outside, the night is still, save for the faint rustle of wind against the shutters. The tavern stands as a beacon in the dark, ready to come alive again with the dawn. Night-time is not an end but a pause, a moment to reflect, prepare, and honor the traditions that make a colonial tavern more than just a business. It is a home, a refuge, and a piece of the town's beating heart, even when its doors are closed. The tavern's heavy wooden shutters rattled slightly in the wind as the hour neared 11. By this time, the great room was mostly empty, save for a few stragglers finishing their mugs of ale by the fire. The hearth still glowed warmly, casting a flicker of amber light across the polished floorboards. From outside, the sound of distant crickets and the occasional hoot of an owl filtered through the thick night air. Just as Samuel, the tavern keeper, was beginning to think the day's work was finally winding down. The faint creak of carriage wheels reached his ears. It was a sound both familiar and faintly ominous at this hour. Late night, arrivals often brought stories and circumstances that could not wait for the morning. He moved to the front door and opened it, the cool night air carrying the scent of damp earth and wood smoke. Through the misty darkness, a lantern's glow bobbed and swayed, growing brighter as the carriage approached. The driver, wrapped in a wool cloak, tipped his hat and called out a greeting. "Evening, friend. Any chance you've a warm fire and some food left?" Samuel smiled and stepped aside. "Always room for weary travelers. Come in, come in, come in." The guests, 2 men and a woman, all dressed in travel-worn coats, entered, stamping mud from their boots. They looked like they had been on the road for hours, perhaps days, judging by the dust clinging to their hems. Samuel noted the way they exchanged glances, as though silently deciding how much to say. Within minutes, the tavern was alive again. The woman requested tea and a small plate of bread with cheese, while the men ordered tankards of cider. In the warm light of the hearth, the tension in their shoulders eased slightly, but their eyes still darted toward the windows, as though expecting someone or something outside. Samuel was not one to pry, but in a place like this, stories had a way of unfolding naturally. Between mouthfuls, one of the men explained they were messengers on urgent business, bound for the port town before dawn. Their coach had suffered a broken wheel, forcing them to seek shelter here. The urgency in his tone hinted at matters of some importance, perhaps political, perhaps personal. As the travelers spoke, the tavern door opened again. This time, it was not a carriage but a lone rider on horseback. The man stepped inside, shaking off the drizzle, his eyes scanning the room with practiced caution. His leather satchel bulged slightly, and Samuel couldn't help but wonder what lay inside. The newcomer ordered only a cup of hot coffee, black, and chose a seat in the farthest corner. He said little, his presence quiet yet unmistakably watchful. From his seat, he could see both the travelers and the door, as though keeping guard. The night deepened, the fire crackled low, and outside the mist thickened into a thin drizzle. Samuel made the rounds, refilling mugs and ensuring everyone had blankets to ward off the chill, but he could not help noticing the subtle current of tension between the two groups, the messengers whispering amongst themselves, and the lone rider keeping his distance yet never looking away. As the hour struck midnight, the unexpected happened, a soft knock at the back door. This was unusual. Guests always came through the front. Samuel, ever cautious, took a lantern and opened it slowly. A young boy stood there, no more than 12, soaked through from the rain. He clutched a folded note, sealed with red wax. "For them," he said, pointing toward the messengers inside, before disappearing back into the darkness without another word. The messengers opened the letter quickly, reading in hushed tones. Their eyes widened, and one of them glanced toward the lone rider. No words were exchanged, but a silent understanding seemed to pass between them. Whatever business they were on had just become more urgent. Within minutes, the travelers settled their bill, thanking Samuel for his hospitality, and made for the door. The lone rider followed shortly after, his coffee untouched. By the time the tavern was quiet again, the rain had stopped, and only the scent of damp wood and extinguished candles lingered in the air. Samuel stood for a moment in the empty room, the echoes of the night's events hanging in the stillness. He would never know the details of what had passed through his tavern that night, but it reminded him of something he had learned long ago. Taverns were more than just places for food and drink. They were crossroads, where lives intersected for a moment before diverging into separate stories, many of which would never be told. With a final sweep of the floor and a gentle push to close the heavy oak door, Samuel turned down the lanterns, leaving the tavern bathed in the quiet glow of the hearth's last embers. The tavern had finally grown still. Only the faintest crackle from the hearth hinted at the life that had filled the room just hours earlier. Shadows stretched long across the wooden floor, dancing gently with the soft flicker of the dying embers. Outside, the night was at its coldest, the air crisp and still, as if the entire world was holding its breath before the dawn. Within the quiet tavern walls, the scent of the day lingered: roasted meat, fresh bread, ale, and the faint smokiness of the hearth fire. The tavern keeper moved slowly through the dimly lit room, each footstep softened by the worn rugs beneath. This was the hour they cherished most, when the bustling laughter and hurried footsteps of guests had faded, replaced by the serene company of silence. On the tables, tankards stood like little sentinels, some still carrying the sheen of foam at their rims. A plate with a forgotten crust of bread rested near the corner, as though it had been left. Behind mid-conversation, the keeper moved methodically, clearing each table one by one, stacking dishes quietly to avoid waking any guests who slept upstairs. The clink of a pewter cup against another was the loudest sound in the room, and even that seemed muffled, softened by the stillness of the hour. Outside the window, the moonlight painted silver ribbons across the frosted glass. Beyond that glass, the village lay in slumber. The dirt road was empty, save for the faint tracks of wagon wheels from earlier that day. An owl called from somewhere in the trees, its voice low and haunting, a reminder that the night still belonged to the creatures of the dark. The keeper paused by the hearth, crouching to coax the embers into a gentle glow. A small log was added, not to spark a roaring flame, but to keep a soft warmth flowing through the common room for any early riser who might wander down before sunrise. With the light came a comforting orange hue, wrapping the room in a blanket of warmth against the chill that seeped through the old wooden walls. Upstairs, a faint creak of floorboards suggested that someone had stirred in their sleep. Perhaps a restless traveler dreaming of the road ahead. Perhaps a merchant, half waking, calculating his next trade. But no one descended the stairs. The keeper knew that most would remain in their rooms until the first glow of morning crept across the horizon. In the kitchen, the slow rhythm continued. A pot was set aside for morning porridge, water filled in preparation, so it would heat quickly at dawn. Bread dough, prepared earlier, was checked to see how it had risen. The scent of yeast was faint but promising. It would be baked just after sunrise, filling the tavern with a fragrance that would gently wake the household. Now and then, the keeper would stop and listen, not just to the sounds of the tavern, but to the silence itself. It was in this stillness that the tavern felt most like a home rather than a place of business. The walls seemed to breathe softly, holding the echoes of the day while embracing the calm of the night. Through a narrow upstairs window, the stars glimmered faintly, as if reluctant to give up their place to the coming sun. The North Star, steady and bright, seemed to keep watch over the sleepy village, guiding travelers who still roamed the dark roads. The keeper's final task before resting was to walk through the tavern one last time, ensuring each candle was snuffed, each shutter closed against the cool wind and each door securely fastened. The iron latch clicked softly as the main door was secured. Then came a small moment of indulgence, a seat by the hearth, a mug of warm cider cradled between both hands. The fire's soft glow painted the tavern keeper's face in gold, while the cider's steam carried a hint of cinnamon. This was the reward for a long day, not gold coins or full tables, but the satisfaction of knowing the guests were safe. The tavern was warm, and the night was at peace. As the keeper sat there, sipping slowly, thoughts drifted lazily to the travelers met over the years, the stories told by strangers, the laughter shared by locals, and the way this tavern had been a small but steadfast part of so many lives. Eventually, the mug was emptied and the hearth's embers sank lower. The keeper rose, moving toward the narrow staircase that led to the small private room above the kitchen. Outside, the horizon was still dark, but a subtle change was beginning, the blackness of night softening into the deep blue that precedes dawn. Somewhere, a rooster crowed, its voice faint and distant, as if announcing the morning long before it truly arrived. The keeper smiled faintly. Soon the tavern would awaken once more, but for now, in these last quiet hours before the day began, the world belonged to stillness. The first faint light of dawn creeps over the horizon, soft and grey, filtering through the frosty window panes of the tavern's upstairs rooms. The air is cool and still, carrying that quiet sense of renewal that comes with every morning in the colonial countryside. Outside, a rooster's crow breaks the silence, followed by the distant sound of a cow lowing in a neighboring barn. Downstairs, the tavern is still in shadow. The embers in the great hearth are barely glowing, tiny sparks buried under the ash from the night before. A single candle flickers on the counter, its golden light reflecting off the polished wood, casting long, dancing shadows across the room. The tavern keeper, already awake, moves softly in the early quiet. The day's work begins long before the first guests stir. He kneels by the hearth, gently coaxing life back into the fire with careful breaths and dry kindling. The faint crackle of new flames joins the sound of the kettle being filled with fresh water from the well. Soon, the comforting scent of boiling water and steeping tea will fill the air, mingled with the aroma of fresh bread warming in the brick oven. Upstairs, floorboards creak as the first of the travelers begin to stir. A merchant heading for the next town slowly dresses by candlelight, his heavy wool coat waiting on the chair beside him. A young farmhand, lodging here for the night, yawns and stretches before pulling on his boots, the smell of breakfast already calling him downstairs. The tavern's stable boy is also up early, rubbing sleep from his eyes as he walks to the barn. The horses need feeding before the stagecoach departs. The sound of grain being poured into wooden troughs echoes softly, followed by the rhythmic munching of the animals. Their breath steams in the crisp morning air, drifting like ghosts in the dawn light. Back in the tavern's kitchen, the keeper's wife, with practiced hands, stirs a pot of porridge. She hums a low tune as she works, her movements steady and unhurried. The tavern cat wends its way between her skirts, hopeful for a scrap or two. On the wooden table nearby, fresh butter, honey, and preserves are set out for the guests, alongside wooden mugs for coffee. Soon, the tavern begins to fill with the gentle hum of life. Boots thump softly on the floor as guests descend the stairs, their voices low and drowsy. A traveller pulls his cloak tighter around him and nods in thanks as he's handed a steaming cup. Another guest, still shaking off the fog of sleep, listens to the stagecoach driver outside shouting to his assistant as they check the wheels and harnesses. The sun is now climbing higher, painting the tavern's interior in warm golden light. Outside, frost glitters on the grass, soon to vanish under the strengthening rays. The morning bustle is different from the evening rush. Slower, gentler, with a sense of purpose. Everyone is preparing for the day. Ahead, and the tavern keeper is the quiet conductor of it all, making sure each detail is in place. As the last of the guests finish breakfast, the tavern slowly empties. Coins clink on the counter as payment is made. Hats are tipped in farewell, and the heavy doors swings open and shut with each departure. The stagecoach departs in a clatter of hooves and jingling harness, wheels creaking as it rolls toward the distant road. The sound fades into the countryside, leaving the tavern once again in relative calm. The keeper stands in the doorway for a moment, watching the road stretch ahead. Another day's work awaits, cleaning rooms, preparing meals, and greeting the next wave of travelers who will arrive before long. The cycle continues, as it always has, each day bringing new faces, new stories, and the same comforting rhythm of life at the tavern. With the morning sun now warming the wooden walls, the keeper steps back inside, the smell of fresh bread and wood smoke embracing him like an old friend. A new day has begun, and with it, another chapter in the life of the Colonial Tavern, a place where the road always leads to warmth, rest, and a story or two by the fire.